You know, after 40 years on this bench, I thought I had seen everything. But the morning of March 15th, I watched a woman walk into my courtroom who made me question everything I knew about pride and pain. I heard one sentence from her that hit me harder than any gavel ever could. I watched the whole room change because of it. And when I finally delivered my decision, I heard a sound I'll never forget, because it wasn't anger, it was relief. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day, because I still carry it with me. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a judge in Providence for 40 years, and I've learned that court isn't really about paper. I've learned that court is about people. I've learned that every file on my bench is a human being trying to hold their life together, even when they messed up. I've had my morning coffee the same way for 40 years. I've had it strong. I've had it black. I've had it so hot it could wake the dead, and Christina knows exactly how I like it. I've watched that cup of coffee become my little ritual, because I've needed something steady before the day starts throwing problems at me. I've been married to my wife for 48 years, and I've learned that she can hear a tough day in my voice before I even say a word. I've walked into my kitchen plenty of nights thinking I hid it well, and I've watched her look at me and say, "I know," like she was reading my mind. I've kept that kind of love close to my heart because I've needed it to keep doing this job without going cold. I've had a father who came to this country from Italy with nothing but hope and a work ethic. I've listened to his stories like they were prayers. I've heard him tell me again and again that a person's name is all they really own in this world. And I've carried that into my courtroom like it was a rule written in stone. I learned early in my career that people don't come to court on their best day. I learned that they come on the day they're scared, or embarrassed, or angry, or tired. I learned that when someone stands in front of me, I'm not just looking at a traffic ticket. I'm looking at the pressure that pushed them to that moment. I've gotten to the courthouse at 8:15 every morning. I've been doing it since 1984, and I've done it so long, my body knows the time before the clock does. I've walked the same hallway, I've greeted the same officers, and I've felt the same quiet hum of a building waking up. That particular morning, I remember that I felt a little heavier than usual. I remember that I couldn't explain it, but I felt like something was waiting. I remember that I held my coffee in both hands for a second, and I told myself, pay attention today. I could smell the coffee Christina brought me that morning, and I could smell the paper too, that dry ink smell from fresh files. I could hear the muffled voices outside my chambers, and I could hear the shuffle of shoes on old tile. I could feel the building breathe, like it was preparing to watch people confess their mistakes. I saw Christina step in with that same steady look she always has, and I saw her set the files down with care. I heard her say, "Good morning, Judge," and I heard that respect in her voice that never gets old. I told her good morning back, and I asked her how her family was, because I've never liked pretending we're machines. I was going through my case files when I noticed one folder that felt thin. I remember thinking that thin folders can still hold heavy stories. I remember that I ran my hand over the name on the front, and I told myself I'd listen twice as hard. I could sense something different that morning, and I could sense it before the first case was even called. I heard the gallery filling up, and I heard little pockets of laughter, and I heard impatience too. I saw a couple of people checking their watches, like time was the only thing that mattered. I took my seat on the bench, and I adjusted my robe, and I looked out at my courtroom like I always do. I've always tried to read a room the way my father read people at the dinner table. I've always tried to see who's scared, who's angry, and who's pretending they're not. I called the first case, and I handled it like I usually do. I listened, I asked questions, I made a decision, and I moved on. I went through a few more, and I kept feeling that tug in my gut like a warning bell. I watched the doors at the side of my courtroom open again, and I watched a woman step in who didn't look like she belonged in court at all. I didn't mean she looked too good for it. I meant she looked like she had come straight from work, like she had come from a place where people needed her more than my courtroom did. I saw her uniform first, and I saw the name stitched on it, and I saw the wrinkles from a long shift. I saw scuffed shoes that had walked too many miles. I saw hair pulled back fast, not for fashion, but for survival. I saw her clutch a folder in one hand and a worn-out purse in the other. I saw the way she stood, and I saw that she was trying to look calm while her whole body was trembling. I watched her eyes scan the room like she was trying to find one safe corner to stand in. I heard Christina call her name, and I heard it clear as day. I heard Maria Santos. I looked up, and I met her eyes, and I felt something in my chest tighten, because I've seen that look before. I watched her approach the podium, and I watched her swallow hard. I asked her how she was doing, and I heard her voice crack when she answered. I heard her say, "I'm okay, Your Honor," and I knew she wasn't. I looked down at the file, and I saw the charge. I saw it was a parking violation in a spot she shouldn't have used. I saw the fine amount, and I saw the notes, and I could already tell the story wasn't going to be simple. I asked her what happened, and I kept my voice gentle, because I've learned that gentle gets you the truth faster than harsh. I watched her hands shake on the edge of the podium. I heard her take a breath like she was about to dive underwater. I heard her say, "Your Honor, I'm a nurse." I heard her say it like it mattered, like she needed me to know she wasn't careless. I heard her say, "I work nights at the hospital, and I don't usually park there." I asked her why she parked there that day, and I watched her blink back tears like she was ashamed to cry in public. I heard her say, "I had to run inside." I heard her say, "My babysitter called and said my little boy had a fever and he couldn't stop shaking." I felt my heart drop because I've been a father and I've been a grandfather and I've known that fear. I asked her how old her boy was, and I watched her lips tremble. I heard her say, "He's 6." I asked her what she did next, and I listened like every word was important. I heard her say, "I left work early." I heard her say, "I begged my supervisor." I heard her say, "I ran to my car and I drove like my life depended on it." I asked her why her uniform looked like she had slept in it, and I asked because I couldn't ignore what I saw. I watched her cheeks flush with embarrassment. I heard her say, "I haven't been home yet." I leaned forward a little, and I looked her right in the eyes, and I asked her the question that became the center of that whole day. I asked her, How many hours? I asked it softly, but I asked it like a father asking, not like a judge. I saw her hesitate, and I saw her calculate in her head like she didn't want to admit it. I heard her say, 16, Your Honor. I heard her say, and I'm supposed to go back tonight. I felt my throat tighten, and I had to pause for a second because I didn't want my voice to show too much. I thought about my own mother, and I thought about the way she used to work with her hands until they looked older than her face. I thought about how dignity sometimes looks like exhaustion. I asked her if her son was okay now, and I watched her nod fast, like she wanted to reassure me. I heard her say, "He's okay, Your Honor." I heard her say, "They said it was a virus, and he's resting." I asked her why she couldn't just pay the ticket and move on, and I asked because I wanted to understand what had brought her here. I saw her shoulders sag like the truth weighed a ton. I heard her say, "I tried." I heard her say, "I'm behind on rent." I heard her say, "I'm behind on everything." I looked at the fine again, and I looked at her uniform again, and I looked at her eyes again. I remember thinking to myself that the law is supposed to protect people like her, not crush them. I remember thinking that a fine can be nothing to one person and a catastrophe to another. I told her something my father taught me. I told her, "My father used to tell me that a good person doesn't need much to prove who they are." I told her, "I can see who you are by the way you showed up here, still in your work clothes." I watched her eyes fill, and I watched her try to hold it back. I heard her whisper, "Thank you," before I even decided anything. I realized she wasn't just asking for money. I realized she was asking to be seen. I asked her if she had ever had a ticket before, and I heard her say no. I asked her if she understood the rule, and I heard her say yes. I asked her if she would do it again, and I heard her say, "Never, Your Honor." I picked up my pen, and I felt the whole courtroom go quiet. I said, and I meant it, "I'm going to dismiss this case." I said, "I'm going to do it because I believe you, and I believe you were trying to be a mother." I said, "Case dismissed," and I saw tears form in her eyes, like rain finally falling after a drought. I watched her hands cover her mouth for a second. I watched her nod at me like she couldn't speak because gratitude was choking her. I saw her step back, and I saw her wipe her cheeks with the sleeve of her uniform. I saw her look down at the floor like she didn't want anyone to see her cry. I felt my own eyes sting, and I blinked hard because I didn't want to make it about me. Now let me pause here for just a second. I need to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who thinks rules don't apply to them? Someone who believes money solves everything? Leave me a comment because I actually read them. And if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button for me. I watched Maria turn to leave, and I watched her walk past the benches in the gallery. I saw people smile at her, and I saw one older man nod at her like he was proud. I saw one young woman mouth the words, "God bless you," and I saw Maria's shoulders shake again. I thought the moment was over, and I thought I'd go on to the next case like any other day. I told myself I'd just done what felt right, and I'd move forward. I didn't know that the same room that had just felt warm was about to turn cold. I heard it before I saw it. I heard a laugh. I heard it coming from the back of my courtroom, and I heard it sharp like a little knife. I heard it at the worst possible time, right when the room was still holding Maria's tears. I looked up, and I searched the gallery, and I found the source. I saw a woman sitting with her legs crossed, like she was in a cafe. I saw her phone in her hand, and I saw her thumb moving like she couldn't stop texting even in court. I watched her tilt her head and smirk, and I watched her eyes follow Maria like Maria was some kind of joke. I saw expensive hair, expensive bag, expensive shoes, and I saw something else too. I saw disrespect sitting on her face like makeup. I didn't say anything yet, because I've learned that sometimes people hang themselves with their own words. I told myself to keep moving because I still had a calendar full of cases. I tried to let it go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my gut was warning me again. I watched Christina call the next few names. I listened, I ruled, I moved on. I kept noticing that woman in the back, and I kept noticing the way she acted like she owned the air in the room. I saw her roll her eyes when someone struggled to explain their ticket. I saw her whisper to the person next to her and laugh. I heard her make little comments under her breath, and I heard the bailiff glance back more than once. I felt my blood pressure rising. I'm not going to lie. I felt that old frustration that comes when someone treats a court like it's entertainment. I reminded myself to stay calm because I've always believed that dignity wins in the end. At about 10:30, I heard Christina call the name I had seen on the file earlier. I heard her say, Danielle Montgomery. I watched the woman in the back stand up like she was being summoned to a red carpet. I saw her walk to the podium with a slow confidence that didn't match the place she was in. I saw her designer handbag swinging from her arm like a trophy. I saw her nails, perfect and long, tapping on her phone even as she approached me. I asked her to put her phone away, and I watched her hesitate like she couldn't believe I'd spoken to her. I heard her sigh, and I heard her say, sure, like she was doing me a favor. I watched her drop the phone into her bag, like it annoyed her to follow a rule. I looked down at the file and I read the charge out loud, because I wanted everyone to hear it clearly. I said, Mrs. Montgomery, you're charged with misuse of a handicap placard and parking in a restricted space. I said it slow because I wanted it to sink in. I watched her smile like I just told her a funny story. I heard her say, is that it? I heard her say, I thought this was something serious. I felt something tighten in my jaw, and I had to take a deep breath. I said, this is serious. I said, a handicap spot is for people who actually need it. I said, it isn't a convenience for someone in a hurry. I asked her if the placard belonged to her, and I watched her shrug. I heard her say, it belongs to my mother. I heard her say, she lets me use it. I asked her if her mother was with her when she parked, and I watched her blink like the question was stupid. I heard her say, no. I heard her say, she's at home. I looked at her and I said something I've said many times. I said, I've learned one thing in 40 years. I said, the law doesn't care about your bank account. I said, it cares about your actions. I watched her tilt her head and smile again. I heard her say, okay, so what's the fine? I heard her say, I'll pay it right now and we can both move on. I felt the room shift, and I felt the tension spread like a fog. I saw a man in the front row tighten his lips. I saw a woman with a stroller stare at Mrs. Montgomery like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I said to her, and I kept my voice level, "This is a court of law, not a shopping mall." I said, "You don't just throw money at something and call it respect." I said, "You show respect first." I watched her laugh again, and I heard it echo across my courtroom. I couldn't believe it, because I couldn't remember the last time someone laughed like that in front of me. I heard her say, "Your Honor, I spend more on shoes than this fine." I saw Christina close her eyes and shake her head, and I saw the bailiff's face tighten. I felt my hands grip the edge of the bench, and I forced myself to unclench them. I told myself that if I lost my temper, she'd win something she didn't deserve. I asked her why she had used a placard that wasn't hers, and I watched her roll her eyes like the answer should be obvious. I heard her say, "Because parking is impossible." I heard her say, "And I had meetings." I said, "People with disabilities also have meetings." I said, "They also have places to go." I said, "And you took their spot because you decided your time mattered more." I heard her huff, and I heard her say, "I didn't hurt anyone." I heard her say, "Nobody was even there." I leaned forward so she could see how serious I was, and I removed my glasses and rubbed my eyes for a second. I said, "You hurt the person who drove in circles looking for a spot and gave up." I said, "You hurt the veteran who had to park far away and walk on a bad leg." I said, "And you hurt the mother who can't lift her child without that space." I watched her stare at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I watched her glance toward the door like she was bored. I saw entitlement sitting on her shoulders like a coat she never took off. I'm going to be honest with you. At this point, I was struggling to keep my composure. If you've ever felt that frustration watching someone disrespect something important, you know what I'm talking about. Hit that like button if you're still with me. And make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next, I never saw coming in my entire career. I asked her for proof that the placard belonged to her mother, and I watched her dig into her bag like she was annoyed to be questioned. I saw her pull out paperwork without even looking at it. I watched her slide it forward like she was pushing a menu across a table. I picked up the paper, and I read the name, and I read the number. I noticed something that didn't sit right with me, and I noticed it the way a carpenter notices a crooked nail. I saw that the print looked too new for a document that was supposedly older. I asked her how long her mother had been disabled, and I watched her pause like she hadn't prepared for follow-up questions. I heard her say, "A while." I heard her say, "Look, Your Honor, can we not do this?" I said, "I can do this." I said, "I can do this all day if I need to." I said, "Because I'm not going to let you treat this like it's nothing." I watched her look around the room, and I watched her smirk like she wanted an audience. I heard her say, "I mean no offense, but this is a waste of time." I heard her say, "People are doing real crimes out there." I felt my chest heat up, and I had to take another deep breath. I said, "Respect isn't something you demand." I said, "It's something you earn." I said, "And right now, you've earned nothing but concern." I heard her say something then that made the room go even quieter. I heard her say, "Your Honor, do you know who my husband is?" I heard her say it like it was a weapon. I looked at her and I said, "I don't." I said, "And I don't care." I said, "Because in my courtroom, a nurse and a millionaire stand on exactly the same ground, and that's how it should be." I watched her blink, and I watched the smile fade just a little. I saw the first crack in her confidence, and I saw her quickly cover it with another laugh. I told her, "Money can buy a lot of things." I told her, "But it can't buy character, and it definitely can't buy your way above the law." I watched her jaw tighten, as if she hated hearing that from someone she couldn't control. I started to speak about the fine, and I started to explain the consequences, and I thought I was still dealing with a typical arrogance case. I thought I was going to teach a lesson and send her home with a penalty and a warning. That's when I noticed a man stand up in the gallery. I saw him in a simple suit, and I saw the way he held himself. I saw calm in him, but I saw purpose too, like he wasn't here by accident. I heard him say, "Your Honor, may I approach?" I heard the bailiff shift, and I saw Christina look up fast. I nodded because I could tell something unusual was about to happen. I watched the man step forward, and I watched him show identification to the officer. I heard him say, "I'm an assistant United States attorney." I felt the courtroom stiffen because those words carry weight even when they're spoken quietly. I looked at Christina, and I saw her already holding something. I saw a sealed envelope in her hands, like it had been waiting for the right moment. I saw her eyes meet mine, and I could tell she was just as surprised as I was. I watched her hand it up to me, and I felt the thickness of it. I opened it carefully, because I've always respected what arrives sealed. I unfolded the paper inside, and I started to read. I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe it because I thought I was dealing with a parking placard. I thought I was dealing with a fine and a lecture. I felt time slow down as I read the names, the dates, and the language that didn't belong in a simple municipal case. I heard my own heartbeat for a second, and I heard the quiet of the room like a blanket. I remember thinking, in 40 years, I had never seen anything like this in the middle of a morning calendar. I looked up at the assistant U.S. attorney, and I asked him what this was. I heard him say, "Your Honor, this defendant is the target of an ongoing federal investigation." I heard him say, "I'm here because today is the day we need to take her into custody." I watched Mrs. Montgomery's face, and I saw the first flicker of confusion. I asked what the investigation involved, and I asked because I needed to understand what I was holding. I heard him say, "Fraud." I heard him say, "Identity theft." I heard him say, "A scheme involving counterfeit disability placards and forged medical certifications." I felt my stomach drop. I felt it drop because I wasn't just hearing about disrespect anymore. I was hearing about someone turning other people's pain into a business. Before I tell you what those charges were, let me ask you this. Do you think wealth should protect someone from consequences? Should money put you above the law? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you believe everyone should be equal under the law like I do, hit that subscribe button. I looked down again and I read more, and I felt my hands go cold. I saw references to bank transfers. I saw references to fake clinic letters. I saw references to dozens of placards issued under stolen names, including elderly people who didn't even know their identity had been used. I heard the assistant U.S. attorney explain that the investigation had taken a year. I heard him explain that they had tracked payments through shell accounts. I heard him explain that they believed Mrs. Montgomery had been selling counterfeit placards to wealthy clients who wanted the best parking without the guilt. I watched Mrs. Montgomery's face try to hold its shape. I watched her attempt to keep that same smirk. I saw it failing, little by little, like a mask cracking. I asked her if she understood what was happening, and I heard my own voice sound deeper than usual. I watched her mouth open, and I watched nothing come out at first. I heard her finally say, "This is insane." I watched the color drain from her face. I've seen it before, but I've usually seen it from people who were poor and desperate, not from someone who walked in acting untouchable. I watched her hands start shaking, and I watched those perfect nails tremble against her handbag. I saw her eyes dart around the courtroom like she was looking for an escape route that didn't exist. I heard her breathe faster. I heard her whisper, "No," like she was trying to wake up from a dream. I said to her, "Mrs. Montgomery, 2 hours ago you were laughing." I said, "2 hours ago you told me you spend more on shoes than this court matters." I said, "And now I want you to understand something." I leaned forward and I looked her directly in the eyes. I said, "The law doesn't bend because you've got money." I said, "The law doesn't flinch because you've got a fancy bag." I said, "The law looks at what you did." I watched tears appear in her eyes, and I watched her fight them like they offended her. I heard her say, "Your Honor, please." I heard her say it small, like she didn't recognize her own voice. For the first time, I saw genuine fear. I saw it strip away her arrogance like wind tearing paper. I saw her look at me the way Maria Santos had looked at me earlier, but it wasn't the same. I saw it wasn't the fear of losing a week's groceries. I saw it was the fear of losing a whole life built on lies. I asked the assistant U.S. attorney if there were agents present, and I heard him say yes. I asked if there was a warrant, and I heard him say yes. I felt my courtroom shift again, and I felt it shift into something heavier than traffic court. I watched the federal agents approach. I watched them move with calm, like they'd practiced this. I watched them step beside Mrs. Montgomery, and I watched the room hold its breath. I watched them put handcuffs on her, and I'll never forget the sound. I heard metal click, and I heard her inhale sharply, like it hurt more than it should. I watched her shoulders stiffen, and I watched her eyes widen like she couldn't accept reality. I saw the designer handbag fall to the floor. I saw it land with a soft thud that felt louder than any shout. I watched it sit there like a symbol, and I watched nobody pick it up. I thought about Maria Santos, the nurse she had laughed at. I thought about Maria standing there with shaking hands, admitting she was behind on rent, still speaking with respect. I thought about the difference between being tired from work and being empty from greed. I watched Mrs. Montgomery glance at the bag on the floor, and I watched her realize it didn't matter anymore. I watched her lips part like she wanted to say something clever, something powerful. I watched no words come. You know what keeps me doing this job after 40 years? Moments like these. Seeing that the law really does apply to everyone equally. If this story is restoring your faith in justice, show me by hitting that subscribe button and that like button. Share this with someone who needs to see it. I sat there for a moment, and I let the room settle. I felt sadness even then, because I've never celebrated someone's downfall. I've always believed that justice isn't joy. I've believed justice is balance, even when it hurts. I watched the agents guide her toward the exit, and I watched her heels stumble on the tile. I watched her try to straighten her posture, like pride was the last thing she had left. I watched the courtroom follow her with silent eyes. I heard the door close behind them, and I heard a collective exhale. I felt my own breath leave my chest, like I'd been holding it too. I looked down at the file again, and I thought about how close I had been to treating her like a simple ticket. Later that afternoon, I had the assistant U.S. attorney come to my chambers, and I asked him to explain the full investigation. I listened as he laid it out piece by piece, and I felt disbelief turn into anger the more I heard. I learned that the numbers were staggering. I learned there were millions of dollars moving through the scheme. I learned there were doctors' signatures forged, clinic letterheads copied, and real disabled people pushed out of the system by fake applications that clogged everything up. I learned that some elderly people had received notices about placards they never applied for. I learned that some of them had panicked, thinking they'd done something wrong. I learned that the investigation had started when a social worker noticed the same address appearing on multiple applications. I sat there thinking about Maria Santos again. I sat there thinking about her 16-hour shift, her sick child, and her fear of a fine. I sat there thinking about how easy it is for the system to punish the wrong people if we stop paying attention. I thought about what I almost did that morning. I thought about how I almost set a fine, shook my head, and moved on. I thought about how sometimes what looks like arrogance is hiding a crime, and what looks like a small thing is part of something huge. 2 months later, I received a letter from her, from prison. I almost didn't open it, and I'll tell you why. I almost didn't open it because I didn't want to hear excuses wrapped in fancy words. I held the envelope in my hands, and I felt that same gut feeling again. I opened it anyway, because I've always believed that if someone is willing to speak honestly, I should be willing to listen. She wrote, and I'm reading this directly. Your Honor, I thought money made me safe. I felt my chest tighten when I read that line, because it was so simple and so ugly at the same time. I read, I didn't see people as people anymore. I read, I saw them as obstacles. I read, I laughed at that nurse because I didn't want to feel small. I read, and now I've never felt smaller. I sat there and I thought about whether people can change. I sat there and I remembered my father's words again, and I remembered him saying that pride is like a fire. I remembered him saying it can warm you if you use it right, but it can burn your whole house down if you feed it wrong. I read her last line, and I felt something complicated. I read, I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm sorry for who I became. I didn't know if it was enough, and I didn't know if it was real, but I knew it was the first honest sentence I'd heard from her. 3 days after the arrest, I saw Maria Santos come to see me. I saw her stand in my doorway like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. I stepped out and I greeted her because I remembered her face as clearly as if she'd never left. I watched her hands twist together and I watched her eyes fill again, but this time the tears looked different. I heard her say, "Your Honor, I just wanted to thank you." I heard her say, "Not for the dismissal." I heard her say, "For seeing me." I felt my own eyes burn, and I had to blink hard. I told her, "I did what I was supposed to do." I told her, "You did what you were supposed to do too." I told her, "You showed up and you told the truth." I heard her say, "My son asked me why I was crying." I heard her say, "And I told him I was crying because a stranger was kind." I felt that line hit me right in the heart because I've always believed kindness is part of justice, not separate from it. A year later, I heard something that gave me real closure. I heard that some of the recovered money was used to fund programs meant to protect the disability placard system and help real patients get what they needed faster. I heard it also funded scholarships for kids whose families worked in healthcare because the investigators had wanted something good to come out of something rotten. And guess who received the first scholarship? I heard it was Mrs. Santos's daughter because Maria had a little girl too, and she had been working toward nursing school herself. I sat in my chambers when I heard that, and I let myself smile, because that felt like the universe correcting itself. I think about that day often. I think about how fast a room can change. I think about how quickly someone's mask can fall when truth walks in. I think about my father coming to this country with nothing. I think about how he never once asked the world to bend for him. I think about how he taught me that dignity is what you do when nobody is clapping. After 40 years, I still believe the law is the great equalizer. But I also believe the law needs a human heart behind it. I believe rules matter, and I believe respect matters, and I believe character matters more than cash. I believe money can buy comfort, but I've never seen it buy integrity. I learned something else that day too. I learned that the person who shows up in a work uniform is often carrying more responsibility than the person in designer clothes. I learned that exhaustion can be honorable, and I learned that arrogance is always expensive in the end. So let me ask you this. Do you think I was too harsh on her, or not harsh enough? I'm genuinely curious what you think. And here's another question for you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have shown mercy or delivered justice? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I actually read them, every single one. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in equal justice like I do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Turn on that bell icon so you never miss another story from my courtroom. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Someone who believes that character matters more than cash. And check out the next video on your screen. I've got another incredible story from my courtroom that you won't believe. I'll see you tomorrow with another lesson about justice, respect, and what really matters in this life. I'm Frank Caprio. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law. Every single one of us. Rich or poor, powerful or powerless. That's what makes this country work. Thank you for listening to my story. God bless you. And remember, respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything.